Hey, welcome to Fat Cats, my senior art show here at Davidson. My name is Pearce Hyatt, and I'm from Portland, Oregon. And if you look around the gallery, I think you'll see there's a lot of intaglio prints and also found objects. And if you're joining us over Zoom, you'll obviously see one found object and one intaglio print. And I think a lot of times you don't necessarily see that kind of mashup of prints and also objects. But I believe that together they make a more interesting synthesis of some kind of human experience. Somebody's coming into the gallery. Yeah, so technical difficulties. All right. Anyways, so yeah, thank you for those who went to 117, I guess. Anyways, so yeah, so there's a blend of print also found. And basically the way and talent, you end up taking, these copper plates and etch them over a long period of time. And you build this process where you have to do everything in reverse, you have to do everything very sensitive to time, and it's very labor intensive. And something about that time you spend on a given person or object, whatever, builds a kind of empathy with it. Now, the flip side of that is with object works, where something about the quickness, the immediacy, the kind of slapdash quality creates a kind of violence between the artist and the physical object, and also between the gallery. Over here, it is a suit from a thrift bought, so obviously it used to be someone else's, and I dipped my hand it over and over and over again. And you've seen the postcards for this show. That's a in progress kind of performance piece with it. Where this one came from for me was a friend of mine passed away, and I remember going to see his grave and standing, with all this dirt in between me and him. That distant of intimacy, the fact that I can't slap him on the back or just or anything like that, it's really tough. And so taking this clothing, this formal outfit that people are buried in, or men are buried in, and then hugging it, this kind of ritual of kind of love and so on, and leaving behind the marks of that performance, help me think about it and so on. Kind of intimate violence that's created with the subject. And then to my left here is a intaglio print, which I imagine if you're coming over Zoom, you may not be able to see quite as well, but I will read it in a second. But so with this one, I took something from a journal. So I entitled it Thanksgiving, and it's written about 25 minutes before Thanksgiving 2021, in which I am talking about visiting my girlfriend in Tunisia and the kind of, basically just, thanks and so on. And it's in that sort of style, the William kind of, here's an etching with writing and so on. And that time and working with all this writing, and keep in mind, I'm writing here. All that time and labor builds a sort of lacier, more delicate relationship with it than with something like this. So before we go to Q&A, I'm going to read this, some thank yous, and then I can field some questions. So one of the reasons I've decided to read this is that in the gallery, there is a television performance amplification piece that I believe does not come across as well over Zoom. But an important part of my practice is this kind of taking my voice and amplifying it in a room, which through this kind of Zoom format where all you guys are in 117, and I'm sure it feels like a movie before you go into the real museum or whatever, kind of World of Coke, you'll get some of that performance in its own new context. So I'm going to read this, say some thank you, and then answer some questions. So Wednesday, November 24th, 2021, 11:35 p.m. Kath has such an amazing strength about new places. Sometimes I think a condition for dating her is having that same strength. Today I spent most of the day by myself, visiting Roman bullshit, taking the train from La Marsa, and then killing time in the downtown until it got dark and she got off work. I felt scared and alone. I felt unable to order food, although I eventually got myself a jambone and fromage. And in the downtown, some guy grabbed my arm, followed me the whole 9 yards. I felt like a total wuss. I am a total wuss, though. I know that about myself. Waiting for Kath, wandering downtown Tunis, sky getting darker, buildings looking grungier, like a 1970s New York gangster movie, and people's faces looking more and more twisted, like when you're first on acid. Waiting for Catherine to get off work, I felt pathetic. But eventually she got out of the taxi and hugged me. We picked up my bags from Sophia's apartment and went to the French pseudo-colonial cultural exchange center thing. We got based on gin and tonics behind the building's metal detectors. I cried about how much I love her, such a wuss. And she reminded me that some days it's hard, some days it's easy. Sometimes it sucks being in downtown Tunis because all the pharmacies are closed and I need antihistamines because of Sophia's 3 cats. So anyways, I just want to say thank you to everybody who's helped me with putting this on. So all my teachers, so, Cord, Katie, Tyler, Nicole, Joelle, everybody who works in the gallery, Leah, David, Julia, Tashani, Molly. I'm sure I'm missing people, but everybody. It's just been so big, and all my classmates and everything like that. So anyways, happy to field some questions and just let me know. And, anyways, thank you.
Can you hear us in here?
Yeah, I can hear
Okay.
you.
Can you tell us a little bit about your inspirations? What artists you look to as you're creating your work? Whether it's the found objects or the prints?
Sorry, I missed that last.
Saying whether it's the found objects or the prints, whichever artists
Right.
help inspire you.
Yeah, I think a big overarching inspiration for me, both with the found objects and the prints and basically everything related to the gallery, is a guy, Bruce Nauman, who does a lot with kind of video, talking, projection. And basically he more is in the world of found objects and video and things like that, but he uses a lot of he has a real keen interest for basically viewing the gallery space as something that's sort of performative and moldable and different. I think when it comes to prints, I really Raymond Pettibone, who's, if you know the band Black Flag, he did the art for that with my introduction. But he does a lot of blending text and image. And recently, I've really liked a lot of stuff. So doing a lot of kind of etching, writing, paper is a big factor, at least as we look back on it hundreds of years later. So those are some ones that are big for me.
Hi, Pearce. Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
There's a question from the chat. What's your preferred medium for art?
I think my preferred medium is probably the intaglio. It's just very intuitive for me to work. Great when you got a real good idea and you really feel something coming out of you. When it doesn't work, it really feels like, man, I just made some garbage. And there's something more rewarding in some ways, even if an intaglio that I don't use, there feels like a nice relationship there. But I also work primarily out of my sketchbook to get ideas. And so that kind of pen, ink, watercolor, Gompi, those kind of resources are really big too. And you don't see that in the gallery, but that's where it starts from.
Thank you so much. And here, another question. Do you think an artist has to work out of their own autobiography? And how do you think your work becomes relevant to a viewer who does not know you or your life?
I definitely think, but I think for me, it's a really good starting point, although I guess I don't view it as a biography, but I guess they are sort of the same. Know who I am, and that's something to explore. So if you come in, there's a projection piece that there's like narration and there's a transcript on the wall, and basically it's all about the ways in which we kind of don't care about each other's biographies. And so that actually feels very central to my work. But I do hope that by coming to the gallery, you feel like you're connecting with, people or a person or an idea or something, but you're connecting with somebody. I think is very central, like that kind of personhood. So I feel like that's kind of the wheelhouse I'm working in.
Great, thank you. Could you talk about your sketchbook more generally?
My what more generally?
Sketchbook?
Sketchbook, gotcha. Yeah, sure. I've kept a sketchbook for like 2 or 3, I guess 4 or 5 years, I don't know, a while. I work out of it all the time. And if you come into the gallery, there's a projection piece that works out of it, where I've just taken a page from it, scanned it, or videoed it and projected it. And I think it's just a point that feels really good, because if you make something in a book with no goal of showing it to anybody else, there's a kind of purity about that space that then when you tap into it later, it doesn't feel hokey because you kind of made it for yourself. And I just do all kinds of stuff in it. It's part journal, part sketchbook, do a lot of watercolor, a lot of pen and ink, all kinds of stuff in that thing. It's great. Highly recommend.
Hi, Pearce. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Awesome. So I noticed that some of your work is more spontaneous, like the suit and the journaling pieces, while the intaglio is much more like preparation and process based. So I'm wondering if you've discovered a preference between those two, because it's a pretty strong contrast that I've noticed.
I think generally I can really say whether or not I like things that take a long time or things that are more instantaneous. But I do think the intaglio, to me, I've really enjoyed lately and really enjoyed in a lot of ways more. I think there's something about that process to me that is, on one hand, very labor intensive, but also very intuitive to me, that I can turn my brain off and do it. And there are steps in which you have to do like mental activities, like, oh, do I put the mark there? Do I put the mark there? And then there's stages where you just put in the acid and you set a timer for, 20 minutes. And so that kind of alternation, I think, is a little bit easier sometimes than when a found object thing, you're kind of on all the time. And there is that same dead space, but it's more spent you sitting, looking at it, being like, God, what do I do? There's something that the momentum is a little bit easier with things that are more complicated, more process oriented for me. But again, it totally depends. But yeah, I hope that's an answer to your question.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thanks, Richard.
One more coming up.
Sweet.
Hey, Pearce, it's Dr. TS.
Hey, Dr. TS, what's up?
So as the obligatory biologist in here, and knowing that you're a biology major.
I am a biology major, yes.
How do you feel that your two majors combined, and how does this help influence your artistic process?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. Thank you, Dr. TS. I think, I really think part of the reason, going back to that previous question about like process, I think part of the reason I love the intaglio stuff is it really feels like what I like about being in the lab, that you have this slightly counterintuitive process, but you know how it works and you know how to do it because you've done it a few times before. And as you do it more, you kind of know what different steps do and you can work through it in a very interesting, critical, also still being creative and still answering different questions. So with the intaglio thing, right? Time different layers of the etching in order for different values of information on the final print, right? Darker to lighter. And it reminds me a lot of, this get really dorky, but like differential centrifugation or like running a gel or anything where you're separating things. It's like by knowing that process, you can then answer a lot of questions for yourself, but you have to know the process. And there's something about that style that I think is a great synergy. So I think the two really work hand in hand for me, even though the art isn't necessarily about science and the science isn't about art. I think they're very related in terms of process.
Hey, Pearce, I have a question for you.
Hey, yeah.
So if a lot of your art is like inspired by you and your personal life, I was wondering what the relationship to the viewer is. So is it like wanting to maybe put them in your shoes, you just like kind of displaying, telling a story, telling your own personal life, or is it like the viewer is irrelevant, like this is just me, I'm making this art either way kind of thing?
Interesting. I don't think the viewers are irrelevant. I think a lot about the performance and the spectatorness of the whole affair. I think while they relate a lot to my personal life, I also do think the viewer has like you can see any of these individual pieces and not know me or think about me. It's only kind of in aggregate that you begin to get a picture of a person. And I think a lot of my relationship with visual art comes from like writing and recording music. And I think a lot of music, it's kind of taken for granted, although not in all genres, that basically, you know, you have a song about a breakup, we assume it's more or less about a real breakup. You have a song about your car broke down. You know, it's based off the artist's life is kind of the starting point. And I think that kind of artistic practice has always really resonated with me. So I imagine you will walk into the gallery and you will get a sense of just the variety of human experience. And there's a composite that's created by the whole thing that, you know, the unifying principle is just that me, a relatively normal person, experienced all of it, and it's true. And you go into the gallery and look at these individual things and either have a reaction or don't.
Awesome.
Is that all? It's all right, not a bad way. Well, if that's all, you guys should come on in if you're coming in person into the gallery and check it out, walk up close, enjoy it. And thank you so much for coming. Seriously. Thank you, everybody.